For this subject, English for academic and professional purposes, I actually am referring to the book that I have from C&E Publishings Incorporated. That book, I find that book to be a very good material in the discussion for reading for English for Acad because it contains a number of activities, and I find that its objectives are aligned to what's really expected to be mastered by students who go through the course. For the first lesson, which I took from the book, it's actually a discussion on fundamentals of reading academic texts. But before we go into its many details, into its discussion, for a while, excuse me for a while. They tend to sustain. Is there someone who tried to check the availability? It's this book. Is there someone who tried to check the availability of this in the bookstores that we have in the city? Because I haven't gone much into the city na. Or maybe in Island City Mall. Just in case you have time, ha? Just in case you have time. If you want, I'm not obliging you, but if you want, you can have a copy of this book because I'm taking my lessons from this. And again, there are also plenty of activities here which I feel like could definitely help you. Not just in the course for the semester, but for whatever it is that you'll do relative to the making of academic and professional text. I mean, that's the name of the subject itself. English for academic and professional purposes. Before we begin, I'd like you to work on this short activity. The activity is very simple. It's a self-audit kind of activity. Self-audit meaning I'd like you to evaluate yourself. If you are, I know, I suggest you write this down on a piece of paper. You create a you create, how do we say this? How do we put this? You create a table with 5 columns. Create a table with 5 columns. In whatever paper you write this, in a notebook, in one cartolina, in one Manila paper, it's up to you. I just need you to create a table with 5 columns and 11 rows in total. 5 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then 11 rows. Done? So fast. No? So done. I hope that this will be... For the first column, you can put there statement number. Statement number. For you to highlight your concentration and focus on the discussion. So first column, first row. First column, first row as well. Statement number. Second column, first row. You write usually. Third column, first row. Beside usually, you write sometimes. Say, go and talk to your crush, something like that. Next to sometimes, on the fourth column, first row, you write seldom. And on the last column, the fifth column, first row, you write never. So you just have to put a check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark. So, bring your attention now to the column for statement number. Number it from 1 to 10. 1 to 10. And then, what's going to happen here is, for every statement number, I'll mention a sentence. And for that sentence, I'd like you to evaluate yourself. Do you usually do it? Sometimes? Seldom? Or do you never do it? And then you put a check mark on the column where the answer applies to you. Let's see how well you are in following instructions. Okay. Oh, wait. Can you show to the camera first how your tables have looked like so far? You show to the camera. Hello. It's because of the background, no? Okay, like that, like that. Okay, okay. Correct. Correct, correct. Let's start, let's start. Again, you don't have to write the sentences. You just listen to the sentences. And then, if you choose from the four frequency options, you put a check mark for whichever applies to you. First statement. I can differentiate academic texts from non-academic texts. Again, I can differentiate academic texts from non-academic texts.
Forces that acts on an object or another object, and that is the concept of motion.
Ready for number two?
According to Isaac Newton,
number two.
Motion
I establish my purpose when reading academic texts. I establish my purpose when reading academic texts.
But please write it there. The first law is the law of inertia. I think you can see that in the share screen. The second law
number
is
three.
The law of acceleration.
I use graphic organizers to see the relationships of the ideas in the text. I use graphic organizers to see the relationships of the ideas in the text.
Okay. Let's first dissect each of the first laws.
Number four. I read the title first, then ask myself essential questions about the topic. I read the title first, then ask myself essential questions about the topic. Number five, I make inferences based on the title. I make inferences based on the title. Number six, I check the evidence and arguments presented to prove the main idea or thesis statement. I check the evidence and arguments presented to prove the main idea or thesis statement. Number seven, I annotate a text to identify essential information, comment on the author's arguments, or relate new ideas to existing ones. Again, I annotate the text to identify essential information, comment on the author's arguments, or relate new ideas to existing ones. Number eight, I read to answer my own questions posed before reading a text. I read to answer my own questions posed before reading a text. Number nine, I make a summary or synthesis of what I read. I make a summary or synthesis of what I read. Number 10, I read and reread the text until my questions have been answered or until I understand its arguments. Again, I read and reread the text until my questions have been answered or until I understand its arguments. Again, this is a self-audit. So there's no need to worry if your answer is different from your classmates. So this is how you will score yourself. For every number, the highest score you could obtain is a 3. Usually gets 3 points, sometimes is worth 2 points, seldom is worth 1 point, and 0 for never. Now, you try to calculate your total based on your chosen answer. Take for instance, if you chose usually in all 10 items, you should get a total of
So aside
30
from the
over 30.
friction towards the ground, air resistance is also a big factor why the ball tends to stop. But in the absence of air resistance and friction, by the way, air resistance is friction in the air. Again, air resistance is the friction.
Don't worry, those
you
numbers
create
have
in the air.
meanings.
Since air is around us and we cannot touch the air, you can only feel it, but there is always that friction that is going to rub into yourself and the air around you. So, in the
Done?
absence of
Done
air
adding your
and
scores?
friction, when the ball
So
will be
I'd
rolled
like
by
you to put
shoulder,
your
it
total
will
score, just
continue
label
to
it
roll.
as grand total. And then
Another
beside
factor
that grand total,
tends
you
to
provide
stop
your
an
description.
object.
If
Another
your
factor that
grand
makes the
total, the
rolling
one that's
ball to
over
stop,
30,
aside from air
ranges
resistance
from
and friction,
28
what
to
else can
30,
make
the
the
description is
rolling ball to stop
advanced.
rolling?
If it's from 25 to 27, the description is proficient. If it's from 23 to 24,
What else will
it
be
is
factors on that?
approaching proficiency. If it's
Yes,
21 to
one factors
22,
that might
description
be
is
the cause of
developing
this.
proficiency.
Yes, that would be acceptable. I did not
And if it's
disagree with you.
20 or lower than that,
Other
it is
factors that might
beginning
pull objects towards
proficiency.
the ground, thus making the object
Again,
stop.
28 to 30
But you're
advanced,
expecting for the
25 to
general
27
purpose.
proficient, 23 to
Like
24
expecting for the
approaching
general factor
proficiency,
that tends
21 to
to
22
stop an
developing
object,
proficiency, and
and this
20 and
general
below
factor could
beginning
be a
proficiency.
person or an object, and that will be a barricade.
I hope you don't mind that I'm going to ask this information from you.
So,
Like,
element of
actually, this
barricade.
information is your ability to deal with academic texts. Are you already in the advanced status, or are you still developing proficiency towards understanding academic texts? May I know the description that you got, James?
Factors that we mentioned, this is what makes the force unbalanced. And that
Okay, what
is
about
where
rands?
the second law comes in. And what does the second law? That is the law
What's your
of
total
acceleration.
rands?
Okay? Before that,
Okay,
here,
that's for developing proficiency. Vince, what's your total? Ano, what's your
the
description?
law of inertia. The resistance of an object to
Okay, what about
change
Rod?
its state of motion. After
Okay,
which you
Sean.
can consider an unbalanced force. If there is balanced force, like for example, you standing
Okay,
in the
Allen.
ground and your force acting on the ground is your weight.
What about Sher?
While the ground also exerts an upward force.
Josh
The
Ray?
ground will just simply lean on or
Okay,
favor
what about
your
Lucia?
weight. The ground will sink, or I mean, you will sink on the ground.
And
You will
Christopher?
not accommodate your weight then. So, how will be
Okay.
able
Thank
to
you so much
change
for your answers. By the way,
the
I would request that you take a picture of that and have that sent to me through Edmodo, because I'll give you some points for having participated in that activity. I know that, sir. Why will you give points? It's your participation that I'm going to consider for the points, because that's a self-audit, an evaluation of how well you know yourself. I'll still give you credit for being honest, and in your, like, in the sheer participation, like you really worked on it. And then please have that picture sent through Edmodo. So that activity is a good reminder of where we all fare now when it comes to our approach towards academic texts. To those who are in the beginning proficiency, and I think majority of the class are in the beginning proficiency stage, you are already in the process of working on it. And many students are quite expected to be still in this level. And to those who are already developing and approaching proficiency, okay, keep on working on it. Continue in that process. By the way, sir, why are you giving so much importance to academic texts? Because the fact remains that as of this time, academic texts are to be met by your age. You should not deny that to yourselves. As of this time, you are in a
Air
world
resistance
where
is one of the main
academic
factors
texts is just
that
nothing but
decelerates
normal to
movement.
you. Anytime soon,
Accelerator
you'll
in
meet more.
advance
If not, you'll
is
make
also
one.
another factor that
I mean, your
accelerates the
share of
time,
research
which will
last year,
now
that is an
uh,
academic text. See, you made
this
one
will
last year.
now
In your experience
pave
last
way
year
for
and in
the
the
balance
experiences that you'll have
portfolio
this year,
systematic.
academic texts, again, are
How do
not
you
new
move
to
using
you.
your
They
bicycle?
will not be
Paano
new to
tayo
you.
nagpapanggap ng
And
disiplina?
so this time, I'm going to
You
have a
tend to
share screen
push the pedal. That pedal is
for the
connected
discussion
to
on. Wait,
the
where is it? The
belt
PowerPoint is gone.
in your pedal, and that belt
For a while,
connects
for
to
a
the
while.
sprocket at the back of the
PowerPoint cannot
at the back
open.
at the rear wheel, and that will in turn
What's
create
wrong with
a
you? Uy?
force of that wheel. How will you able to move?
There.
The wheel pushes the ground backwards. Para bang
There.
pinupush ng wheel yung ground backwards. So the end result is you tend to move. But how is it that the ground stays the same? Because you tend to push the ground backwards, so the ground
So
itself
here's
will
our
also push
discussion.
you forward.
Fundamentals
Para
of
bang
reading
there is now
academic
na the
texts.
interaction between the
We
ground and
start with
yourself.
this. The
The
texts
law
that
of
you read in
acceleration only
school are
focuses on the
definitely
advanced
different
force.
from the
But
ones
how
that you
did
spend with
get
during
the
leisure time.
acceleration? There is now
Like when you're at
the
home,
interaction
I don't
between
know, but
the
I'm
weight
not
of
sure if
the
you're the kind
bicycle
of
and the ground.
person who
Every
reads
bit of
grammar books
object
for the sheer
around
purpose
us
of
has
leisure.
an interaction with one
Is that
another.
the kind of thing that you do
The
at home? Like
terminal portion
when
stays
you're
there
bored,
in
or like
every
when you want
action.
to have some leisure time,
Take note
do
of
you
this
go and
way.
get a math book
In
and
every
open it
action class,
and
there
read the
is
contents of a
always
math book?
that equal
I
but
doubt,
opposite
and I
reaction.
think that's normal for students. If I
Kaya
were a student,
every
if I were
action
at your
you're going
age
to
myself,
create will
for the
generate an
purpose of
equal
passing time,
reaction
I might
on the opposite
do
direction.
novels instead.
Kanina, drawing tayo.
Not
Gusto ko drawing.
not that I have something against academic books, but this is quite a truth. The texts that you read in school, the materials that you read for academic purposes are not usually the ones that you read during your leisure time. Because as it is meant to for leisure, it is expected that the material you'll read provides leisure. While the text that you read for pleasure, such as novels or magazines, can be likened to the appeal of sweet desserts, there are the ones which are quite appealing for reading,
That's not
especially magazines, and like if you are interested in what's found in those magazines. Academic texts though are more like the heavy main
nangyari
course. More often than not, they need to be chewed and savored for a long time before they get
sabihin,
fully
describe or
digested.
incorporate the third law in this
When you
illustration.
talk of
Ibig
magazines and
sabihin,
novels, I'm not saying that you will not really
ang
understand their
subject is
contents,
written
but at
at the
some point,
exam. Ito
you
si
can make
Jesse.
them as passive as how you want
Exam
your
paper.
reading is compared to what we do with academic
Then tayo
texts.
is now writing
By the way,
this by
there are
paper.
parts of this discussion which are not found in the module. So what I'll do is I'll have this PowerPoint presentation posted in Edmodo later on. Please remind me. Hala, which reminds me, sure, di ba there was something that you should have reminded me from last year?
Walay pedal. Walay pedal. This is a pedal. The back pedal.
That was a year-long reminder. Sure, no?
Okay. So when you trend
Sure will remind me again
pedal
later of this PowerPoint
bicycle,
presentation for sure.
your downward
Let's go with
force
academic texts.
will create
Academic
force.
texts are first and
Ito yung
foremost
rotational
objective.
force na
What makes
nangyayari
them
sa
objective is that in
meron
so
na
many of their
downward
forms,
force.
they are based on
Because
facts
there is
with good foundations and support. The author sets
Generated by the
his or
downward
herself
pedal
apart
allows
from
the
that
wheel
material.
to turn.
And
When
so we
the
will
wheel
not see
turns
any personal
turning,
tone
the
in the
motion
text.
is backward.
Yes, writers have emotions, but
As
when
the
it comes to
wheel
the creation
pushes
of an academic text,
the
such
ground
emotion
backwards,
cannot
the upwards
exist.
at the same time
Such
pushes
emotion
the wheel
isn't there.
forward. Kaya
Is this
nangyari,
book an
hindi
academic
move forward.
text? It
Diba? That's
is.
how
When you
meanwhile,
flip open over
the
these
force
pages,
that
will
is
it make you cry?
pulling
I
this
perhaps when you look at a
would
calculus
generate
book,
a
you will.
backward force on the
When you
ground.
look at
At
the
the
pages
same
of a
time,
calculus
the
book, you just might
ground
feel like crying
pushes you forward with an
because
equal force.
it might have just
Right?
have
In the
it just
law,
might have
in
so many
general force
information
of the
that's too
law of motion,
overloading. That reminded me
action
of the time that I
if
studied for
there is an
capstone.
action,
I was
there is
looking at the
always
camera. I was looking
that
at my
result.
computer, and I
But
ended
on the
up crying
opposite
in front
spectrum,
of the computer. My brother asked me. My
when
brother
you
laughed
try
at me
to
while I was crying. I was crying because
uh,
there was just so much information for me to read.
what's the English of kuhin?
An English
When
major
you try
studying
to
aeronautics,
kuhin
trying to
some of
understand civil engineering,
there's always
and
a reaction. And the reaction is
it felt like there
kuhin
was just so much for me to absorb.
something that you will
And that made me
get
cry.
your
Not that the material was a tear jerking
head
material, tear jerker
further
in the first place. No, it was not.
at home.
It was an academic material, but because of the overwhelming overload of information, that's where the crying happened to me. But when you look at originally at these
I believe that
academic
is the
materials,
point of a rifle.
emotions are set
When you
apart
tend to
by the
squeeze the
writer
trigger of a
in terms of
rifle
in
or
relation to the
even
content of the text. These
gun,
academic texts
still
are
there.
written by professionals in
But
varying
bullet,
fields. Like if someone
most of the
specializes in the
work.
field of
But
medicine or
what
is
is
a
the scope
doctor,
recoil?
that person
The
most
recoil
probably
is
created an
the
academic text
handgun moves
for the
forward.
field of
That is why,
medicine.
for some
If
reason,
someone
when you need to
practices
hold the
the
rifle, you start to
profession of
press. And
architecture
yes,
and
we
the
are
person
very
created
accustomed
an
now
academic
that
text, then
it's
it
going to
belongs to the
that
field in
because of
architecture.
reaction
If
and the
someone
recoil.
specializes
That
in economics,
scenario
then
tends
the
to
material that
represent
he or she
the
will have
actual
made
reaction
falls
between
under the
the
field of
gun
economics.
when you
Academic texts often take
yeah,
years to publish because of the review that
the
it goes
gun
through. The review is really
fires
intense.
a bullet
Plus, this
and
can be
that bullet
traced to
moves
the
forward. At the
solid
same time,
basis
the
that is
gun
needed
will have a
for
recoil
the foundation of the
and that
facts
is
found
felt
in an
by the
academic
gunner
text.
itself or the person
They
who
also use
tried
formal
to
words, and
operate the
sometimes
said
there
gun.
are technical terms
That is
relevant
how
to the
the
field
law of
where that
information
text
is
belongs.
explained. That
Like
is
you should
how the law of
expect, if it were a material or
thermodynamics
an academic text in the field of
demonstrates
medicine, there are plenty of terms
understood and
that
it
only
is
those who
based
belong in
on
that field
person who
can
know it
comprehend very well.
right now.
It's not even a
You have
material that will
the
just be read by
wires
anybody. I mean, it can be read by
so
anybody, but it's not
the
something that could
horse
just be
moves
understood by anyone
forward but the wagon
unless you're
pushes the
someone
horse
who belongs
backward.
to the field where
If
that
the force of
text
the wagon
is
is
categorized
equal to the
into.
force exerted by the
Lastly,
horse, the
these
horse will
kinds
not
of
move.
texts usually include
But if
a
the
list of
horse
references.
exerts a greater
The
force
referencing that it
compared to
does
the force
also
that the
supplements
wagon
the
gave to the
solidity of the
horse, then
basis
there is now a
established
collision.
in the academic
Now
text.
comes the
In
advantage
fact,
force. And
the
as
more
also accelerates
references
the
there
motion of the
are,
horse towards the ground
people would find
backward,
that
so
academic
the
text to be
horse moves
more
forward.
reliable.
This is something that now
That would
tells the
give
horse.
readers the
So
idea
this is
that the
now
person who
illustrates
made the academic
how the
text
interaction
really took
happens if
himself
that
out
simple
from giving
motion
opinions.
generated by the horse
Those that are found
tried
in the text
to
are really based on
and
authorities
this
and
shows the
sources out
law of
there. When
interaction.
you
When
read a
there is an
novel,
interaction
you don't
there,
find a
the
bibliography
law of
section at the end
interaction
of that
states
novel
that in every action
because
there
there's
is always
in a
an
novel,
equal
it's an experience of man that's being shared, that's being
in this kind of
translated into the
determinism
form of
you only have
whatever that
one
novel was all
outcome.
about.
And
If
not
you look
only
at
that,
this
in this
one,
diagram,
this academic
this
text,
law, the second
its
law.
sources are
This law
quite
is talking
many.
about
See?
acceleration.
Bibliography.
What does
There are many, so at
thermodynamics?
least 3 pages have
Acceleration
been
is equal
allotted
to
for the, not
the
just three, but 5 pages have been
divided
allotted by the
by
editor of this
the
book for
mass.
the making of the
For
bibliography section.
acceleration to be possible,
See?
the force should
Sources.
be greater than the
For
mass of the
non-academic
object.
texts,
And that
they are
force or mass
non-objective. They
is
tend to
not
be more
only the
personal,
force
and
exerted
opinions or one's
in an
point of view
instant, but
are
also
more or
the
less
total
welcomed
force
here.
exerted on an object.
But those opinions
So
are
you have
neither
total
correct
force acting on an
nor
object,
incorrect.
then that is where we
They are
get
not
the
counted for
total
as the
force.
only ones that are
For
only
example,
correct.
to understand
It
this,
may be at some
how do
point,
we
from
share
someone's
an electron?
perspective, it is acceptable. In someone
I
else's
exerted a
perspective,
force of
it's not.
50 newtons, 5
Non-academic texts are
to
written
move
for the
a
mass public.
box. forward.
Since it is not particular of
But the
any field
box
of
generates
specialization,
calculation
the
force
mass
of 20
public
newtons.
acts as the audience,
The box
necessary audience
generates
for the
force of
for the
20
non-academic
kilograms
text.
for 20 newtons.
These are
Then
published
I force
quickly
the
with
box
no
and the principal
specialization
has
needed.
applied 50 newtons, but
And
the box
lastly,
has a
authors of
friction of
non-academic
20
texts
newtons.
use
What is my
casual
net
and
force
informal
of the
language.
box?
Slangs may even come out in these kinds of text.
Example.
What are examples of
Anyone from the
academic
group who
texts?
can share an answer?
We may have an
What are
article,
net force
like the one,
required to
some of them probably you've approached in research. So you may call them the ones that are the what is this?
also nobody
Entries published in scholarly journals.
slowly.
This type
What is the
results
net force
from
required
research
to
and development and can even have its impact on the academic community or provide relevance to nation
30
building.
newtons?
For example, this
Now, you
journal
take
or
this
this
diagram
article
and
published
push
in a
the box
scholarly
apply
journal.
50
The
newtons.
title of the article is
Donor
Experimental Educational
help me.
Networking on Open
Donor
Research
help
Issues,
Donor
Studying
help me.
PSS
Because support
Applicability
to
and
push the
Development in
box
Emerging Context.
at
Is it
let's
an
say
academic
force
text?
of
It
10 tons.
is. It's an article.
In the
It
absence
is
of
of a
friction, what is the
particular,
net
very
force
formal
required?
language. The genre is even
I push the
specific.
box for 50 newtons
Authors of
and
this
Donor push
and
it
their credentials
net
are
force
actually being
required.
referred to. And
This
I
is
tell
the
you, when you
friction.
open this link,
What
when
is
you
the
open this
total
file,
net force
it would
required
lead to a
for the
particular,
box?
it would lead to a
As
document
to
with a list of references.
Mark
Next,
and Boy.
conference papers. Those that are taken as well from research and are presented in conferences, be it in a local conference or in an international
Hello,
conference.
Mark and Boy.
These are papers presented in scholastic conferences. They may even be revised as articles or possible publications in scholarly journals. So if this conference paper gets published, then the researchers or the owners of the paper will look for a scholarly journal who will eventually decide to have this work published, reaching a wider audience.
Chelsea. What is the total
Next,
net force that is required?
reviews. They provide evaluations or reviews of works published in scholarly journals. Like this one, this is a sample review, a literature review of someone's work. And then you also have theses and dissertations. These are personal researches written by a candidate for a university or college degree.
Tama ba si
The
Elijah?
experience that you had last year that counts as a thesis. So those who are trying to pursue their doctorate degrees, many of them do dissertations. A master's degree would require a thesis. For graduation in college, you would be required to submit a research paper translated into a thesis. These are just a few of the many examples of an academic text. And based on these examples, it can be said that in this kind of reading, in reading academic text, full concentration and comprehension are required to understand information, themes, arguments, ideas in the text. When people meet academic texts, they have reading goals. It is important, of course, that you should know your purpose for reading early on so you can have time and improve your comprehension. It's important that before doing some form of reading, you should know what drives you to read, especially when it comes to academic texts. So be guided by these questions. Before you read an academic text, ask yourself the following questions. Why am I reading this text? And what information do I need? What pieces of information do I need in the first place? And what do I want to learn? Below then are some general purposes for reading an academic text. There may be an idea that you wish to understand even further. So there's already an existing idea and you want your knowledge and understanding of that idea to be supplemented. So you read more to get ideas that could support a particular writing assignment. Like what you did in research. You read academic texts either online or on print. Sorry. Because you're looking for something that could support whatever it is that you have in your research. Primarily as well, there are people who read academic texts for the purpose of gaining more additional information. More information, having additional information. Or that they might want to identify gaps in existing studies. In relation to research, they might notice that something is weak in one's research, in one's study. And how do they plan to filling that up, to filling that hole out? And so they use academic text. Connections of new ideas to existing ones can also be achieved if you read academic text. Content and style of academic text. They include concepts and theories that are related to specific disciplines they explore. They also exhibit properties of a well-written text. Familiar of these properties when we had reading and writing last year? Properties of a well-written text. It has coherence, unity, organization, cohesion, adherence to the rules of language use and mechanics. All of those are really to be formal and strictly observed when doing academic text. That is not to say that in non-academic text, we disregard the formality of words, correctness of language use and mechanics. No, of course, that's not what we're saying here. But there's just a different level of observance to these guidelines when we deal with academic texts. In general, authors observe the following when writing academic text. They state critical questions and issues, provide facts and evidences, use accurate and precise words, avoiding jargon and colloquial expressions, because jargons are, the danger with jargons is that it's not as exclusively to be understood by many, or it just might appear not as formal as how that academic text should supposedly appear. All the more with colloquial expressions. Academic text writers also take an objective point of view and avoid being personal and subjective, because in the first place, for an academic text, the writer sets himself apart and his emotions apart from the intent of the material. Most importantly, references are listed down that could establish the credibility of the one making the academic text. They also use hedging or cautious language to tone down their claims. Hedge expressions are words like seemingly, appears, it seems. There are plenty expressions that would tone down their claims, because if they don't, it would appear as though they are already presenting truths, or that they're claiming that they're kind of giving out that their claims are really truthful all the while. So as to avoid being accused of such problem, they use hedging expressions like probably, seems, possibly, assumption, there's the suggestion, may, might, could. They could actually be used as hedging expressions. Again, any kind of language or any expression that can be used to tone down their claims, that is a hedging expression. There are strategies that readers can incorporate when they meet academic texts. It could be, by the way, these are just additional discussions. Reading academic text would require focus and understanding. Obviously, it does. Critical or reflective reading helps you identify the key arguments presented by the author and analyze concepts presented in the text. Reading strategies. First, you have before reading. And these are the things that you can do when you are exposed to before reading. Basically, before reading is done for conditioning purposes. It's that strategy of reading where the reader sets the mood for the task of reading. Take note of that. The reader at this point conditions him or herself that there is a reading task that needs to be accomplished. There is an academic text that is meant to be read. And once that text is met, The reader then tries to do these things. We'll try to evaluate, is this text meant for me, for this kind of audience? What is the writer's purpose here? What is the writer's attitude towards, what attitudes do I also have towards the author and this text? What do I know about the topic, and what am I expected to know or learn from this topic? How recent is this text? Recency, I think you should have known by now that to me, especially when it comes to research, recency is really special. It's a special criterion that I give high regard to. I don't just let anybody cite someone's work because I'm after of how relevant that material is to the time that it's being quoted or cited. And then part of before reading, how many references have been listed? Right after before reading, someone may proceed then to during reading. In this during reading stage, annotations can really be done. You can freely annotate a text. In fact, so many of you probably did that in your notes last year or are even doing that with your notes now. The module, academic or non-academic text. The modules that you get from us, they are academic texts. So what students possibly do is to annotate on them. And these are the things that you can do when you annotate. Look at that. Surely you're guilty of this. Write brief notes on the margin. Like, if the modules were printed this way, you'd maximize this space. And you'll write, even if it were on the book, even if it were a book, this one, let's assume that this is the page of the book, for sure, you would not want this space to be wasted. So if you could write something here, you will write something here. And maybe, which is, you're probably even fond of underlining words or highlighting them with colored markers. That is an act of annotation. Or while listening to the teacher, you found like there's an important point that was mentioned, so you wrote it down close to the area in the book where that term has been mentioned. Guilty. But actually, that is an annotation style. Or, what does this word mean? I'm not sure what this word meant. I'll have to refer on this in the dictionary. Dictionary. Oh, so what you'll do is you'll underline that word, you'll encircle it, and then you'll draw a line with an arrow at the end, meaning of the word. And then you will not, some of you probably won't even write the long definition. You'll just pick out important words from the definition that you found in the dictionary if it's a long definition. But if you feel like, yeah, I think this definition is fine. It's not too long. It's not also too short. I'll just put all of the words there. Guilty. But then again, it's all right because that's actually a reading strategy. Annotation is a reading strategy. Here's my book in accounting when I was in college.
Example number 2.
My accounting book in college, people. See, color, highlights. I even put, who among you would do this? Check marks. Like, you'll put check marks. What I did here was to put check marks on them without even reading them. Just that feeling, but not since, they are in numbers. Check. I'm not even sure if I would make use of those information or write on them. I hope you could see it in, it's written in pencil though. Can you see the pencil? Wait, where am I? There, camera. Can you see the pencil writings? When we put solutions, this is a solution. Within the problem, that is an annotation. This is for an ABM subject, man. Wait. Here's what I'd like you. This is what I was looking for. Okay.
to solve each of the
See
problems,
the
the
underlines
understanding of what is
of
achieved.
varying
You try
colors.
to solve some problems, and perhaps it will give you
Oh,
a
guilty
head start
of varying
in the
colors.
future. The
And you won't even
problems
know
after
why did I
the
even
course.
set the colors this
Right?
way. Lucia seems to have been guilty of that.
Number
Oh.
two,
At first, when I was in college, my
so we
intention,
should look
this
at
was
the
really my
rating
intention
graph.
before.
The
If
first
it's
one
just a
is
term, that's the color. And then if it's a matter of enumeration, there's another set of colors.
the
And then if
consistency
that's a definition, I'll have another colors.
that
But then
makes
suddenly I lost track of my plan. I ended up having plenty of colors in these pages.
is used to make it
And
start
this is
moving
still my
smoothly.
attempt to do
What is
annotations.
asked in the
And I
problem
think it didn't work because I failed in this
is an
subject.
idea. What is asked in the
Yeah,
problem
I
is
failed
a
in
catalog
this
of
is the thick
content.
this is that book. Oh, it's a thick book. We love this more than our lives. I had my accountancy class in HNU at that time. I was a second year college
What is asked in
student.
the problem?
And then I had to cross to the other side of the street to BQ Mall. Diba? HNU main building,
Very good.
BQ
So
Mall.
we are
We have to
now
cross the
going to the
street.
acceleration.
One time it
So
started to
showing
rain.
up
And
acceleration, we
I
have it
who would want to place this inside a bag? So we would prefer to carry this
We have to
ourselves.
find
You
the
know what
source
I did?
and
Because
divide
I
it
treasure
by
this more than my life.
2,000.
I placed
Since
this
the
inside my
formula,
uniform.
it is clear enough that the operation is
It
simple.
didn't bother me
Now,
anymore that I have to get
divide
wet
the
than my
values
book getting
given in the
wet.
problem.
Because I could
Of
always have that
course,
option of
divide
using
by
the
extra to keep
typical
it balanced.
practice. You'll cover your head with a book to protect yourself from whatever it is that could hit you in the head. But what I did was to put this underneath my
4,292.
uniform
And what is the mass
just to
of
make
this
sure that it
rock?
doesn't get wet.
Continue to
I
write.
didn't care anymore if my uniform was wet because of the heavy downpour of the
2,000
rain.
kilograms.
That's why the book is
Currently,
still
we
alive.
check with what
This
will be
book
the
was
type
still in
by the
2007.
unit
Oh.
in our
It's a
answer.
2007
We
book.
need to make sure that the
I
unit
even had my.
of your mass
Imagine, this was my
is
marker in
the
2007.
same with what the unit in your
And I still have it inside this book.
numerator as well. So we have
That's
here
for the subject where I failed in accounting.
divided by 2,000. If you look
I
closely
treasured
to the
something
unit
which
in the numerator, and that is Newton,
caused
and
my
try to
failure.
convert it
I
as
blame myself for my
kilogram,
failure.
that
See, oh, look at that practice. In annotation, we underline important
then the
words.
denominator
Underline important words. But we end up underlining everything.
solution that will simply cancel the
Supposedly, what we are to underline are just important keywords which we could associate to the knowledge that we want to remember.
over 2,000
But we end up underlining every sentence.
transfer.
Or when we do highlights, it's as if there will be like 5% of the entire page
The result
that
of
has not been highlighted.
100 divided by 2,000
Other activities in annotation. So, highlight relevant and essential parts. But we try to rationalize this.
What is the
Sir, all of these words are relevant. So I'll highlight everything.
may calculator ba tayo lahat?
Headings, okay, create a back of unfamiliar technical words to be defined later. I did this when I was in high school when we were required to do a book reading report. So I had a notebook
So the answer
with
is
a list of unfamiliar words which were
2.5.
also defined.
And the units
Context clues
are
were used,
quadrants,
synthesizing author's
so it's
arguments,
supposed to be
determining main
meters,
ideas, and might lead to
and that meter
this
is
one,
square.
a possible annotated
If
text.
we're not finding the area, but we're
Guilty?
finding the acceleration.
When you received your module last
That
time,
will now be
did they look like this?
this one. Let's have number.
Sir, my modules were really neat. They were, sir. Because I didn't even know, sir, that
In
we had
number 5,
modules.
you have
Wow, according to Rod, much worse.
two.
What did let's try to determine, Rod, what here what did you from this example, what did you do which we could not find in this example of an annotated text?
Force divided by acceleration. With your force of 30 newtons divided
See,
by 5
see,
meters.
yes.
Before we
And that's the
go,
beauty of that,
let's
though.
now place
No matter
the
where you place the definition, you could actually locate it.
So your numerator
And when your classmates would want to see, have you had that experience? Can I borrow your notes? And then when they looked at your notes, wait, what does this mean? And then you tell yourself, in the first place, I made those notes for me. I didn't make them just so you'd understand my notes. I made my notes so that I could understand them because I'm the one studying them. And then somehow they would get mad at you. Your notes are not organized. To me, they are. Because actually, if you look at this annotated example, in terms of neatness, in terms of organization, maybe it didn't pass your standards. But the owner of this copy surely has a reason why they've been annotated in this manner. The owner of this page surely would understand everything that's found here because that was his or her approach towards annotation. Like that given example of Rodney. She's willing to encircle a word and have a long line to have the meaning placed somewhere else. Because who knows, the other parts might have already been filled out already. So Rod has to look for an empty space, would try her best to look still for an empty space, hoping that there's one. And in the event that the space is just too small, too minute, I think we would try to squeeze in something which we would still be able to understand. That's a product of annotation. After reading would involve reflecting on what you learned. It like what's the new knowledge that you learned from this discussion? How different is it from what you've known before? Something like that. You link the main idea of the text to what you already know. Or you discuss some parts with your teacher, classmates, or like you raise questions. Sir, what do you mean by that part, by this part of your notes? Sir, this is something that I've read in the material. What does this mean? That is part of after reading because after reading the text, there was something that you were trying to process together with another person. Questions regarding before reading, during reading, and after reading as a reading strategy, as reading strategies. Without knowing it, oh, diba? You did a reading strategy yourselves. Or when you discuss something with a classmate, even your answers, when you would discuss answers with your classmates from an academic text, that's your attempt of after reading. Like for instance, in math, there was a problem that was placed on the book and then you contacted your classmate. Classmate, what's your answer on this? That's you discussing, that's after reading. But let's not use this as an alibi. Why did you copy their classmate's answer? Because that was a product, sir, of our after reading strategy. Because, sir, in after reading, we are expected to have a discussion with our teachers or classmates. Sir, we understand. You cannot make yourself available. So I have to have a discussion with my classmate. Please, let not my subject be the reason why you should work on all the time with your classmates for an answer. Because I think I just gave you an idea there to justify that action. Ma, pa, I have to go to my classmate's house. Why? After reading. For the purpose of after reading. Because that's a reading strategy. That's a reading strategy. Thanks to EAPP, I learned how to justify my act of sharing, asking for answers from my classmates. And then, if you request your classmate, can I ask for your answer? Sorry, but I will not because the teacher will get mad. And then you, on your defense, you can say, but aren't we supposed to practice what we have learned? I'm trying to apply after reading. Why will you not respond to my after reading? If I were you, you tell the classmate of yours, don't go, you after read by yourself. Please, don't. For Thursday, you might notice there are no activities to answer in this module. We will do a continuation with SQ3R until KWL. So for now, I'll end the share screen. Share screen. Present now screen. And if we have questions, now's the time. Do you have some questions? If there's none, I think we can call it a day from there. Goodbye and thank you, grade 12.